Hi, welcome. I'm Michael. Today's show is a great show. It's called "What Suicide Leaves Behind." It it's a show that is very much part of my life. I have personally lost 27 people to suicide, and I actually met our guest, Patricia. Thank you for coming here
Oh, my pleasure.
at a support group for suicide. So I know this is, really your passion. And so thank you for being here because I think you have a lot of information and resources for people that maybe this is a new subject to them. And I'm not quite sure where to start, but let's start. So, maybe how did you? I know you had dove right into it. You're a psychotherapist that specializes in
In
grief and
suicide grief,
yeah,
yeah.
and but you started on a 1-800 suicide line, right?
I did. I started with, I guess, prevention and intervention, so working at the 1-800 suicide. Um, and I remember I was speaking with Lisa Zucker, who is a wonderful grief therapist as well, and she introduced me to FISP, speaking about suicide, and then I dove into postvention and suicide grief, and I wasn't yet a survivor of suicide, which the word survivor, well, a lot of the times we think somebody who has attempted
Yeah,
suicide.
they don't realize it's the family members that are the
Exactly.
survivors.
In the grief world, when we use the word survivor, we mean somebody who's surviving the loss of a loved one.
Right.
So that's why the survivors of suicide are people grieving the loss of a loved one to suicide.
Yeah, because it leaves you for the rest of your life
Yeah.
affected.
Absolutely, absolutely. Suicide grief is a little bit different from other types of grief, because with most types of grief, if it is to a car accident, to an illness, to homicide, you have something or someone to blame. With suicide grief, you don't, right? So you don't really know what happened, how come it happened, why it happened at that moment. So there's a piece of the puzzle that's missing, and since we can't have somebody to blame, we tend to internalize the blame and we blame ourselves. So I remember there was a survivor of suicide who once I was working with him and I drew something on a piece of paper and I said, if you could blame this right here, uh, what would that, how would that be different? And a couple years later, he came back to the group and he's like, that was a huge thing for me, because it's true. Is we tend to take it in because we can't explain it. So if we had a place to put the blame into, it distracts also from the pain of the grief, right? Just like anger distracts from pain,
Right.
so does guilt.
Yeah.
It distracts from that
No,
pain.
I mean, my experience and my learning about it, there are so many emotions that are attached to it. As a survivor, there's guilt, could I have done something? Could I
Mm-hmm.
have called them? Should I have known? Should I have seen something? Is there any way I could have helped them or saved them? So there's guilt. There's sadness that the person's gone and chose to end their life that way. Then there's confusion because you don't know what happened, why, even if they leave communication, why it still doesn't make sense to you. So
Yeah.
me personally, I live with all these things for each of these people that have left my life, and it's so I get it. It's all consuming, pretty much,
Yeah, it's like we didn't think about our loved ones this much when they were alive,
right?
right? And it's interesting because I was speaking to someone and we are talking about suicide and suicide prevention, and we said if we knew that the time that we have left with somebody was finite, maybe we wouldn't just do
We
our
would be
life.
different,
We would be different, because the idea is like, it's not that I love you any less when you're here and I love you more when you're gone. It's just that I have the time with you when you're here, and I don't know that that time is finite. So you're part of my everyday life, and I love you when I love you, but I love you all the time. But when I don't have you anymore, then I think about all the moments that I was doing something else, that I wasn't with you, which is guilt over that as
right?
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, have you experienced? Are you a survivor yourself?
I am. I became a survivor of suicide a few years later. Is actually, if you look at my logo, I was just telling you that Scott Spradley, who's a really good friend of mine, designed my logo with me. So he was there when I started my company, Advocate to Create.
Yeah, we were going to dedicate this show today to Scott for you
Oh,
and to my
yes.
friend Karen, who killed herself about 5 years ago. Who actually today is her birthday, and I didn't realize it
Oh, wow.
until this morning. Yeah, so we'll dedicate it to their souls. You know,
Absolutely.
that's all we can do right now.
It's all we can do. It's funny. So religiously speaking, from my faith, I'm Jewish, and I was taught that when you pray, you help your souls go up. So I'm like, if I have control of nothing else, personally speaking, I can do that.
Right.
Right. And then when I speak with survivors of suicide, being in the group or being individually, some individuals believe in signs and in afterlife, and some don't. So we have the conversations. Like I remember when Scott died, I was in Brazil. I wasn't here, and oh my God, I was meeting my husband's brother and his family. And I remember we were driving in Rio de Janeiro, and we went up, and when people like are painting the street, and so like this guy I guess must have stepped on the paint and stepped on the
It makes
the
the
mountain.
tracks from it. Yeah.
And we were in this mountain. It's a beautiful view. And for some reason, when I saw that footprint, it was like a boot, and I thought of Scott. I had just found out that he had killed himself, and I stepped on it, and I'm like, you're seeing Brazil through my eyes. And these signs or this meaning that we associate, that it brings something.
Right.
It helps with the healing at times.
Yeah. And it's real. You know, I'm a medium, and I do readings for people and channel, and so I am connecting with people that have passed on, every day for somebody else. So those signs really are a very common thing that everybody relates to me.
Yeah.
So it's I personally believe it is really them. When you're feeling them and you think they're with you and you have a thought about them, it's really them trying to communicate and let you know they're there with you.
Yeah. And it's funny because I hear a lot about just want to get over it. And there is no getting over, because getting over is like no thoughts at all, don't think
I mean,
about it.
I can speak to, the spirit world, but I can't get over the 27 people that have left my life
Yeah.
by this choice.
We learn to live with it. Right? You learn to have a harmonious relationship with it, and sometimes you want to connect. Right? Halloween was Scott's favorite
Yeah.
holiday. So we always connect with that, and even with survivors of suicide is one of the things that is brought about a lot. When you start to think less about the person, there's that guilt. Now is the guilt about feeling better, right? I'm starting to be able to live my life without the lingering questions 24/7, and so sometimes they will come to group to reconnect, to have that connection again, because you don't want to get over it, but you want to be able to live with it.
Yeah, I mean, the pain is so intense and all the emotions are so intense about it. You still have to figure out a way to function during your day and have this,
Yeah.
This part of you that never leaves you. So,
And
and that's what you do. That's what you help people with, is learn how to live with these feelings and emotions that they have, right?
and to know that it is okay.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when you lose someone to suicide, for example, let's say you lose a spouse to suicide, it's not only that you lose that person, but also what life would be like with that individual. When you lose a child, what their graduation would be like, what their marriage would be like. When you lose a sibling, it's that friendship. So each of them are different and unique in their own ways. But sometimes you might feel jealous of another person who has their loved ones right there with them, and then you feel bad about that jealousy, and there's nothing wrong with that, because it's not a jealousy for them, it's I don't get to have that person here with me. So it's being able to say that it is okay and validate that emotion, and rather than shun that emotion. Now, if I could, just a couple things that we can sometimes do.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So we've discussed what it is.
Yes.
Now,
So,
how can somebody get helped with it? You know?
with suicide grief, you talked about thinking about it all the time. We call it the lingering questions, right? What I could have done, what I should have done, the tyranny of the shoulds and the what ifs. So we have what we call like facts and counterfactuals. The counterfactual is that if I had only, right? If I had done this, then this person would have had killed themselves. And we believe that we are responsible for everything and omnipotent to be able to, have changed the outcome. Those are counterfactuals, and we think about the things that we didn't do. So I like to implement what I call like a cognitive balance. So for everything that you didn't do, that you believe you didn't do, think about all the things you actually did do. Right? Think of both. Give
Don't
way
focus
to
on that
both.
last phone call you didn't make that day.
Exactly. Focus on all the calls you did make.
Right.
Right? Because those are facts. Those are
And how
things
much
that
energy
happen.
and love you put into that person's life, and the things that you did share with them, and
Exactly.
the phone calls that you did have that were helping and talking about each other's problems, and
Yeah.
that you were actually there together for
Because
that
it
time.
allows you to think not only of the last moments, but of the entire journey that you had together with that individual. So you're not focusing on, the last page, but you're focusing on the entire book.
Yeah.
The being able to speak with people and allow people to know. So when we think of grief, everybody's kind of uncomfortable with it, right? And you grow up with that, oh, don't cry, and that, oh, don't cry, it has such a good intention, is a way to console it. But you are telling the person who is crying, stop crying, because that makes me uncomfortable,
Right.
right? So it's just be
And don't
close
have
to
your
me.
emotion
Yes.
because it's bothering me, you know.
Exactly. So it is like just be there with me. Another thing I would like to say, so suicide grief, my experience, right? There's one study that I saw with parents who lost their children to suicide or homicide that talks about this, but you don't get over it or learn to live with it in the first year. The first year is very surreal, right? The second year becomes more real. It is painful, but it's a different type of pain. By the third year, and this is not based on research, it's based on my experience working the past almost 10 years with survivors of suicide. By the third year is when you start to adjust to the new normal. And in the study that they did with parents, that's what they found. In quotes, they said, by the third or fourth year, I was able to put my child's grief into perspective. So to give more of an understanding of what it is like, because you don't just stop feeling it 1 year after. It's like, oh, it's been a year already, you should be over it.
Right. Now, it sort of seems to be what I believe is a common occurrence is that parents that lose a child, somebody that loses a sibling, a husband, a wife, that person who's left here has suicidal tendencies all of a sudden.
Yeah, there is a higher likelihood of suicidal ideation to individual high risk to survivors of suicide, because
so that's
you
a
start
normal
to
thing that
contemplate
can
Yes.
happen to somebody who's left here.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
because the pain is so intense that you don't know what to do with it. It's all consuming in a way. So
Yeah.
you do contemplate suicide. You do wonder, I want to see my loved one again, and sometimes it's hard to focus on the here and now.
Right.
One thing that does happen a lot is a changing pace. So if I lost someone to suicide yesterday, then I may become numb and in shock for a while, and let's say a year goes by, but to me still feels like yesterday. So the time goes by slower, if that makes any sense. So people feel like they need to catch up.
Right. So, there's a lot of people say that suicide is preventable.
Yes.
Is that something that you personally believe, or?
I believe that there are suicide that are preventable. I don't see that every suicide is preventable. The way that I see it is, if you think about illnesses like cancer, some cancers, when they caught early enough, depending on the symptoms, you're able to do chemo, treatment, surgery, remove it. But some cancers, when they are not, either because they were caught much later on, or the type of cancer it is, you have the days counted, right? You can try anything and everything that you want, but there isn't a cure for it, if I may. Um, I believe the same is true when it comes to suicide. I believe that a lot of suicides are preventable, but not every suicide is preventable. And it's I'm gonna take it kind of compare it to COVID a little bit. With COVID, we don't know what it is, where it is, who has it, who doesn't have it. We're all scared because we're wearing masks and we cannot see it, right? With suicide, it's very similar. We think about depression, right? You don't see depression. Depression is not sadness. It's like when you're sad, there's a reason behind being sadness. Depression is waking up with 50 pounds on each hand, and you want to be able to do something, and you see other people doing something, but you can't do anything. And I kind of say it is like a vampire. It loves the darkness and is very seductive. And it tells you that you're alone and no one loves you. And it's that constant negative conversation in your mind. But it is invisible to the eye.
Yeah.
And you don't know that somebody has it until they possibly show it or let you know. Scott, I had no clue whatsoever. And I was working at the 1-800-SUICIDE. And I didn't see anything. He was the life of the party. He had a great mask on. And most people do.
Yeah. I mean, one of my first experiences with my cousin Bethy, as the story was told to me, she was at her mother's house. They had a great time, had a great conversation. I'll talk to you later. She went home, and that was it, you know? So, you know, and my aunt is very astute. She would know her child, you know, was feeling something. She spent a lot of, they were close, and no clue.
No. It's really hard to see, and I like to tell people, like, with all the respect, I live and breathe suicide for, I don't even know, not just working with it, but studying it. I did not see it. So it's hard to say, you know, like when I've studied what
So
signs
is that kind of
are
when
and
you're
all
saying
that.
it's not preventable? When you can't, there's just no clues. You
There are
don't
no,
know that
but
you're
then
supposed to help the person.
afterwards, there are all these clues that
Then
you
you
didn't
realize, right, oh, I should have seen this, or they were a little different here, or they maybe a little off, or...
see. Exactly. And so, like, after the fact, like, we only know what you know the moment we know and not a second before, if we're talking about, you know, Erickson's statement. And I think that's very true. We do the best with the knowledge we have at the time. After the fact, we are able to see it in a different light because then we have more information. But at the moment, we can only do the best that we can with the knowledge that we have. And that's part of that guilt of, oh, I should have seen it. I should have known.
That's a lot of parents. I think that's their biggest emotion that they have, is their guilt that they couldn't see it in their child.
Yeah. The feeling of having failed as a parent.
Right.
And it's very difficult to be able to imagine, you know, losing a loved one, being a parent, being a child, a sibling, a spouse, a friend. They are all unique in their own ways, even though they're all to suicide. But you do feel a part of it not having seen it, right? But I remember some parents of suicide have told me, like, I wish that they talked about it in parenting books. How to talk to your children about suicide and just about death in general, because it's not something we talk about at home.
No, it's very hidden.
Yeah.
It's very taboo. Nobody wants to discuss it. And
it's
so
very
many
important.
people, and actually, and the part of this show is because I don't know the numbers, but I keep hearing that it's skyrocketing because of the pandemic.
Yeah, because of the loneliness, the isolation. We are social beings, right? When you think of how you describe yourself, I am a wife, I am a child, I am a sister, it's always in relation to somebody else. Even my last name, right? If I'm saying Timmerman, it talks to my Timmerman family. Barbosa da Silva is by the family that I married into. So we are social beings, and when we're isolated, think about the quarantine. It has different contexts. Some people are quarantined with their families. Some people are quarantined by themselves, and they can't really go out. They can't really meet other people. So you're having to be isolated. And I remember working at the 1-800-SUICIDE. That was one of the main things, feeling lonely, feeling alone, feeling isolated. So that's when you see a big increase. I believe it's correlational to COVID.
Yeah, and it's people that haven't had it before. It's not, and there are people that, through their lifetimes struggle with mental health and have the thought and maybe even try it a few times. But I would imagine that what's happening on our planet is so beyond anything anybody can comprehend that it really must be bringing on feelings of people that just could never imagine that they could have had these feelings.
I'll say, like, in my company, we have had clients that had it not been for COVID, maybe they wouldn't, have come to see us because they would have found other coping skills and in socialization. And, like if you go through something negative, you usually confide within your family or your friends, or you go out and you keep your mind distracted. Distractions are good. They're band-aids. They're not a Neosporin.
Right.
Right? You don't process it, but it's a good band-aid.
Right.
When we come to therapy, the idea is that it will be your Neosporin. You're able to process through it in order to find out how to heal.
Yeah. So I know you do support groups for an organization called FISP.
Yes, the Florida Initiative for Suicide Prevention.
And they're in, I think they're like in Weston or somewhere
Yes, I think
around that area is their office. But they have, I met you because you do support groups here in Miami even.
I do the Miami support group. I've been volunteering with them, I want to say, for 7 or 8 years. We meet every second and fourth Wednesday of the month, and right now we're meeting through Zoom. There are several other groups they have all around South Florida. So if anyone is interested, visit, I think it's fisponline.org.
Yeah, and it should be in the description underneath the video. There should be a bunch of links that you're gonna share with us.
The AFSP, which is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, they have a resource place for books. Books are great because it talks about the different experiences from different survivors of suicide. So you're not alone, because sometimes when you're having those emotions and the guilt, the what if, the lingering questions.
It's a very lonely
It really is.
Situation.
And then to know that people share that, the way that I describe it is you're in a world where everybody's fully clothed and you're naked.
Right.
And when you go to group or you find somebody who understands, it's like you are in a room with people who are naked together. So you don't have to keep on hiding and protecting yourself. You get to say the good and the bad and be able to express yourself.
And you're with people that truly understand. You don't have to explain it to them.
Exactly.
You can walk in the room and they'll know what you're feeling.
Yeah.
You don't have to say a word almost.
Yeah, I don't have to be scared about it's been a year already and I'm still grieving that whole idea that I can't grieve anymore, and we grieve for the rest of our lives. The person that you lost doesn't stop being important to you just because you're not physically here.
So you had told me some other resources that we were going to put underneath the video.
Yes.
There was a texting number,
there's the 741-741 is the texting crisis line. There's the 1-800-SUICIDE, which that's where I used to work, the lifeline.
And it's free and confidential.
It is free. It's free, it's confidential, and they are great individuals. The Jason Foundation has an app called A Friend Asks. Now, the Jason Foundation, Jason was a young boy who killed himself. I think he was in high school, and his father, if I'm not wrong, created the Jason Foundation. And A Friend Asks is a great app to be able to use to, just see what are the signs, if I want to help, how to be able to, if I have somebody that I know is having suicidal ideation, to give them something. Right, the American Association of Suicidology, which I believe is suicidology.org, is also another great resource. There are great books out there to be able to read. So groups are very important. Finding therapists who focus on grief and suicide grief can be very helpful as well through this process.
So they can call your office.
Absolutely.
Look on your website. They can also look on the FISP website and find out about the support groups that they can join virtually.
Yes.
and you'll be with other family members and friends and loved ones to, to help
Yeah.
you and understand and support you.
There's a group that is not specific to suicide, but it's called Compassionate Friends, which are for parents who have lost a child to any type of death.
Right.
And the Children Bereavement Center, of course, which is great for children who have lost their parents. Not specific to suicide again, but it's a resource for children.
Right.
And usually when they have it, now I think everything is online, but before they would have concurrently a group for parents as
Yeah.
well.
So there are a lot of resources right now on the phone, online,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have to be alone. You can get help. You
Yeah.
don't have to feel alone.
Absolutely. If you go on my site, there is a page called A to C Talk, where we do some blogs and vlogs, and there's one there that I wrote when Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade passed away to suicide. And I wrote about, if you are somebody who wants to help, the do's and don'ts, and what you're experiencing as well, right? So one of the things with the do's and don'ts, if you want to help, is, food, stuff like that, like just bring to the person's house, just help them. Don't ask them not to cry. If you see them crying, you can either, step to the side if you're uncomfortable, or just be there. All they want
Right.
is for you to just be there and know that they can count on you.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we learn, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. You don't need to say anything at all. Just
Right.
be there.
Yeah.
And don't be scared to say the person's name. Believe me, you will not remind us that our loved ones passed away. You remind us that they lived.
Right.
That's very important. Allow us to speak their name.
Yeah. Well, this was amazing. I really want to thank you for coming on here and sharing your knowledge and resources. I wish we had another 2 hours to talk about this, because probably we could do another 4 hours on this.
Oh, I can go for
Definitely.
days.
But I really, really appreciate this, and I hope that somebody sees this. Forward this video. You never know whose life you're going to save and who you're going to help. And thank you, and come back next week for another amazing guest.